low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Saturday, February 7th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Dow hits 50,000 for the first time. Bets on U.S. growth help power rally's latest stages, but warning signs remain, by David Uberti. The Dow Jones Industrial Average hit 50,000 for the first time on Friday, the latest milestone in a years-long run in which the U.S. economy has muscled past its rich peers and snapped up investment the world over. Since the blue-chip index plunged below 6,600 during the depths of the 2007-09 recession, it has effectively moved in one direction on the flickering screens of Wall Street, up and to the right. Bouts of trading turmoil that periodically upended the Dow now seem like speed bumps in the U.S.'s rearview mirror. An era of ultra-low interest rates helped spur the longest post-war expansion in U.S. history and pump Silicon Valley into a global juggernaut. Washington threw massive amounts of money into the financial system and economy to propel a rapid rebound from the pandemic. An artificial intelligence boom has more recently juiced the stock market at a historic scale. The Dow's final push above 50,000 arrived at an unlikely moment, as Wall Street has ramped up scrutiny of AI mania, and a slump in software stocks began spilling into other areas of the market in recent days. Investors have funneled money into real economy stocks in a wager that the U.S.'s growth is once again accelerating. We don't think that the U.S. opportunity is over by any stretch of the imagination, says Chris Hyzy, Chief Investment Officer of Bank of America Private Bank and Merrill. The big wild card in 2026 is how a top-heavy market reacts to AI-inspired volatility, from fears that the bubble will burst to warnings that new technologies could upend entire industries. In recent days, add-ons to Anthropic's Claude product sparked a sell-off stretching from software providers to legal services companies, eventually sweeping up AI giants. Are investors going to run and hide, Hyzy said, or view that as a buying opportunity? In recent years, at least, buying the dip has largely proved to be a safe bet. After a slump in software turned into a sell-off that battered the tech sector in recent days, investors came back in force on Friday, fueling the Dow rally that topped 1,200 points, or about 2.5%. The S&P 500 gained 2%, while the tech-heavy NASDAQ composite rose 2.2%. The week of wild trading ended with NVIDIA jumping more than 7% Friday. Other chip stocks followed. Even some of the software companies hit hardest by the recent pullback finished the session higher. Microsoft clawed back some of its recent losses but finished 6.8% lower on the week. Salesforce shares halted their steep drop-off. Technological disruption rarely eliminates all incumbents. Seema Shah, chief global strategist at Principal Asset Management, wrote to clients recently, but it does reshuffle the hierarchy. Stocks' gravity-defying rally has pushed companies' valuations to previously unfathomable levels and minted a class of millionaires whose spending has helped keep the economy humming. A new generation of risk-taking investors increasingly toes the line between trading and gambling. The Dow's 30 firms, established companies, from manufacturing to media, haven't captured the full weight of those forces. Since the index first hit 25,000 in early 2018, mainstays including Goldman Sachs, Apple, and Caterpillar drove an outsized portion of gains. Boeing, 3M, and United Health Group lagged behind the pack. NVIDIA replaced Intel in a sign of how AI is redrawing the global financial map. Even though NVIDIA, Microsoft, and International Business Machines have helped drive the Dow higher in recent years, its long rally lagged behind the tech-focused NASDAQ composite and increasingly AI-heavy S&P 500. But the blue chip index has recently outpaced its counterparts as investors rotated holdings into the banks, industrial firms, and other sectors more directly linked to the real economy. Walmart shares catapulted 28% higher over the past 12 months, while Johnson & Johnson surged 56%. Coca-Cola advanced 25%. The Dow has recently benefited from the rush to such real economy stocks, outpacing the other major indexes as traders reconsidered tech bets or sold AI winners to cover losses elsewhere. The Dow Jones Transportation Average of logistics firms and airlines has also jumped, a signal to market technicians that the move higher has room to run. It's part of the re-acceleration theme, said Jose Torres, a senior economist at Interactive Brokers. The Dow's climb in recent months marks a U-turn from earlier last year when President Trump's tariff ramp-up sparked a Sell America trade in which stocks, bonds, and the dollar fell in tandem. Shares in Chevron, Nike, and others plunged in April, dragging the index 16% below its post-inauguration highs. Since then, many of Wall Street's worst fears of the tariff onslaught haven't materialized because of an expanding array of trade deals and exceptions for key products and materials. As U.S. growth keeps powering ahead, investors are hopeful that the Federal Reserve will continue cutting interest rates this year despite elevated inflation. Still, as the Dow charts a course to 100,000, there are warning lights in some corners of the economy. Price pressures continue to squeeze millions of lower and middle income people. U.S. hiring has been sluggish, and even Fed Chair Jerome Powell has cautioned that official figures might be overstating the labor market's strength. At the same time, economic growth and expansionary government policies overseas have helped international markets outperform their richly valued U.S. counterparts in recent months. That could mean pressure ahead for some of the stocks that have pushed the Dow higher. With Trump in office, there's glimpses of the Sell America's trade, Torres said. Whenever that sentiment grows, folks move a little bit more money into Europe. Staying with the economy, consumer sentiment ticks up for month by Matt Grossman. Consumer sentiment ticked higher in February, according to preliminary reading from the University of Michigan's monthly survey, a signal that Americans' economic mood is improving despite long-standing anxieties about inflation and the job market. The University of Michigan sentiment gauge crept up to 57.3 in February from 56.4 in January. The index was mired near all-time lows late last year, but has gained stronger footing in the past few months. Analysts polled by the Wall Street Journal were expecting a gloomier reading of 55 this month. The numbers show preliminary results from the initial period of the survey's outreach to households. A final February number will land later in the month. Joanne Hsu, the director of the survey, noted that while the past few months have brought slight sentiment improvements, the rise has been gradual. Concerns about the erosion of personal finances from high prices and elevated risk of job loss continue to be widespread, Hsu said. Consumer expectations for inflation over the next year declined, but longer-run inflation expectations ticked up slightly. Federal Reserve policymakers are especially intent on keeping longer-run inflation expectations in check, giving their concerns about rising inflation expectations among consumers. Amazon saved billions under GOP tax law by Richard Rubin. Republicans' new tax law delivered for Amazon.com, which saw its U.S. corporate income taxes shrink by more than half in 2025 while its profits climbed, offering one of the clearest examples yet of how the largest American companies are benefiting. The company's current U.S. taxes, an accounting measure of taxes incurred last year, declined to $1.2 billion from $9 billion, according to a securities filing released Friday. Meanwhile, Amazon's pre-tax U.S. profit increased by 44.5% to $89.5 billion. On a cash basis, the company paid $2.8 billion in federal income taxes last year after paying more than $7 billion each of the prior 2 years. The law signed by President Trump in July is boosting individuals' tax refunds this year and made two major changes that quickly helped Amazon and other corporations. First, the law allowed companies to claim immediate deductions for certain capital investments rather than spreading those write-offs over several years. Those upfront deductions are the pieces of the law that will have the greatest bang for the buck because they accelerate investment, economists say. Like other tech companies, Amazon has been investing heavily in data centers, and much of the equipment inside would qualify for the immediate deductions. The company said it spent $340 billion in the U.S. last year, including operating costs and capital investments. Second, The new law reversed a piece of the prior Republican tax law that companies had been complaining about. The old law required them to spread out deductions for research starting in 2022. The new law permits immediate deductions for new domestic research and lets companies accelerate previously delayed deductions. Congress made changes to the tax code to encourage greater investment in the American economy, its innovation, and its workers, all areas where Amazon has long been a leader, the company said Friday. Due to Amazon's unprecedented U.S. investments, our tax bill this year reflects those changes. Other large companies have been reporting benefits from the new law. In a filing this week, Google parent Alphabet said its federal and state current tax expense declined by 36.6%, while its pre-tax domestic profit rose by 32.9%. Amazon lobbied on the tax bill and was involved in pushing for the changes for the research deduction. In its earnings report Thursday, the company said it expected to make capital expenditures of $200 billion in 2026 as it accelerates spending in artificial intelligence projects. The company is increasing AI-related spending while cutting costs, laying off another 16,000 employees, and closing underperforming businesses. For accounting purposes, Amazon's global effective tax rate effectively went up in 2025, increasing to 19.6% from 13.5% in 2024. That is in part because the company's research tax credits declined slightly while profits increased. The accounting rules that are used to compute the effective tax rate include both current taxes and deferred taxes. So accelerating deductions into 2025 doesn't change that rate. Amazon recorded $11.1 billion in deferred U.S. taxes, along with its $1.2 billion in current taxes. The company said it expects the tax law to have a similar effect on its 2026 tax payments. Deducting our costs more quickly provides a short-run benefit, but this policy ultimately doesn't change the amount of tax we pay. It just changes the timing of our tax payments, the company statement said. At times over the past decade, Amazon has reported little or no current U.S. taxes while reporting large profits, a pattern that drew the attention of members of Congress, particularly Democrats. In 2022, under President Joe Biden, they created a new corporate minimum tax aimed at ensuring that companies pay at least 15%. But that law was written to retain incentives for capital investment. And while companies such as Meta Platforms have warned that they are getting hit by that tax, Amazon's filing doesn't suggest much effect from it. U.S. Watch. Washington, D.C. Sewage repair will take weeks longer. Repairs on a pipe rupture that has sent sewage flowing into the Potomac River northwest of Washington, D.C. will take weeks more because of an unexpected blockage, according to the local water authority. In a release posted on its website Thursday, DC Water, which operates the sewer system, said a video inspection of the pipeline revealed the blockage inside the collapsed sewer line is far more significant than originally thought. It said it discovered a large rock dam about 30 feet from the breach in the sewage line, which requires treatment before the current spill can be addressed. It will take an estimated 4 to 6 weeks longer than initially anticipated to get a system in place to address the problem, DC Water said. The 72-inch pipeline, called the Potomac Interceptor, collapsed January 19th. CDC. U.S. births fall after 24 uptick. U.S. births fell a little in 2025, according to newly posted provisional data. Over 3.6 million births have been reported through birth certificates, or about 24,000 fewer than in 2024. The decline seems to confirm predictions by some experts who doubted a slight increase in births in 2024 marked the start of an upward trend. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention updated its provisional birth rate data late last week, filling in 2 months of missing data and offering the first good look at last year's tally. The posted numbers account for nearly all the babies born in 2025, according to the CDC. Data is still being compiled and analyzed, but the final tally might only add a few thousand additional births, said Robert Anderson, who oversees birth and death tracking at the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Immigration Crackdown Strains the DOJ by Sadie Gurman and Hannah Critchfield. When a lawyer representing the Justice Department told a judge in open court this past week that she was exhausted and, quote, "this job sucks," she said out loud what many federal prosecutors had been privately feeling for months. The Trump administration's immigration crackdown and the push to arrest many of the demonstrators protesting against it is straining U.S. attorneys' offices across the country. Already overworked, government lawyers in cities that have seen unrest, including Minneapolis, Chicago, and Los Angeles, have been rocked by departures, crippling caseloads, and directives from Washington that have made them uncomfortable. Justice Department officials have repeatedly sought reinforcements from other cities and government agencies, even temporarily assigning military lawyers to help deal with the crush. Department lawyers in several offices told the Wall Street Journal they emphasized with Julie Lay, a Department of Homeland Security attorney who was detailed in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis to bolster staffing. They said her remarks during a Tuesday court hearing described a working environment with which they had become familiar. When you show up, they just throw you in the well, and then here we go, Lee told the judge, adding that she had stayed awake until 2:35 a.m. that day preparing. She said she had stupidly volunteered for the Justice Department role and had been given no direction since starting last month. Lee was on loan from Immigration and Customs Enforcement to help the Minneapolis U.S. Attorney's Office wade through a deluge of cases brought by immigrants challenging the legality of their detentions. The office has been overwhelmed by more than 500 such habeas petitions in the 8 weeks since the Trump administration launched a massive deportation effort in the Twin Cities, sparking protests. As of this past week, the office has had fewer than 20 attorneys, down from 55 in January of last year, and others are expected to leave in the coming weeks, citing concerns about the Trump administration's approach, people familiar with the matter said. Visiting prosecutors from Michigan, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, and elsewhere have stepped in. One person familiar with the Minnesota office said there are so many new faces that you walk down the hallway and you don't even recognize anyone. Administration officials say attorneys are swamped with immigration cases now because they are playing catch-up after the lax enforcement under the Biden administration. And prosecutors are bringing more charges against demonstrators because the assaults against officers are on the rise, they said. Justice Department spokeswoman Natalie Baldessare said some of the strain on government lawyers comes from judges not applying the law properly. After 4 years of de facto amnesty under the previous administration, the Trump administration is complying with court orders and fully enforcing federal immigration law, she said. Minnesota's Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen said in a recent court filing his office has been forced to shift its already limited resources from other pressing and important priorities to deal with the enormous burden posed by the petitions. Paralegals are continuously working overtime. Lawyers are continually working overtime, Rosen wrote, adding that the office's civil division, which would normally handle such cases, is down 50% in staffing. The problems extended well beyond Minneapolis. Other offices are stretched thin as they try to fulfill the administration's demand for charges stemming from street protests against immigration enforcement. This past week, department leadership told all 93 U.S. attorneys to find prosecutors who can be sent to other districts on short notice to help investigate and triage violent crime cases, according to a memo reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Justin Simmons, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas, recently told Justice Department leadership that he urgently needed reinforcements to deal with the volume of immigrants challenging their detentions. In a statement, Simmons said his office's civil attorneys are doing their best to manage the caseload and have represented interests of the American people on this front with professionalism and a degree of legal acumen all Americans should be proud of. Several judges have chided the Justice Department for missing deadlines or otherwise failing to comply with court orders in scores of cases, saying those failures, even if a result of being overwhelmed, were a problem of the administration's own making. Having what you feel are too many detainees, too many cases, too many deadlines, and not enough infrastructure to keep up with it all is not a defense to continued detention. If anything, it ought to be a warning sign, U.S. District Judge Jerry Blackwell told Lee in the hearing this past week. Trump deletes post of Obama's as apes. Washington. President Trump, this is by Natalie Andrews, Ken Thomas, and Anvi Bhutani. President Trump posted and later deleted a video online that included imagery depicting former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama as apes, prompting swift condemnation from Democrats and Republicans. The video was deleted late Friday morning after the White House initially defended it, following calls from lawmakers of both parties to remove it. The White House blamed a staffer for posting the video. The roughly 1-minute video, which posted on Truth Social at 11:44 p.m. on Thursday, features a narrator questioning the security of voting machines used in competitive states in the 2020 election. In the final seconds of the video, images of Obama's faces on the bodies of cartoon apes appear. They bob their heads against the backdrop of a jungle, and the song of "The Lion Sleeps Tonight" plays. The imagery plays into long-standing racist tropes dehumanizing black people. It prompted rare pushback from GOP lawmakers, many of whom are reluctant to criticize the Republican president publicly. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, one of the highest-ranking black Republicans in Washington, criticized Trump's post, praying it was fake because it's the most racist thing I've seen out of this White House, he wrote on social media, calling on Trump to remove it. Republican senators across the ideological spectrum condemned the post, including Senators Pete Ricketts of Nebraska, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, John Curtis of Utah, Katie Britt of Alabama, and Susan Collins of Maine. The post was blatantly racist and inexcusable. It should never have been posted or left published for so long, Curtis said. Some congressional Republicans who criticized the post said Trump should issue an apology. Mark Burns, a South Carolina pastor and Trump supporter, said he spoke with Trump about the post. The president made it clear to me that this post was made by a staffer and not by him, Burns wrote on social media, adding that he urged Trump to fire the staffer. This kind of insensitive and racist communication does not reflect the heart, values, or leadership of the President of the United States, nor does it represent the America we are striving to build. Earlier Friday, the White House defended the president, saying the imagery of the Obamas was a clip from an internet meme that portrays Trump as a lion and Democrats as cartoon animals. Please stop the fake outrage and report on something today that actually matters to the American public, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said. The original meme depicts Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker as an elephant, Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the House Democratic leader, as a meerkat, and former Vice President Kamala Harris as a turtle. The animals bow down to Trump. The video Trump posted on Thursday night included the portion of the meme that featured the Obamas but didn't reference the other Democrats. On Friday, Jeffries wrote on social media that the Obamas represent the best of our country and called Trump vile and unhinged. Why are GOP leaders like John Thune continuing to stand by this sick individual? Every single Republican must immediately denounce Donald Trump discussing bigotry, Jeffries said, referring to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, Representative Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, called Trump's post wrong and incredibly offensive, whether intentional or mistake, and should be deleted immediately with an apology offered. An Obama spokeswoman didn't comment. As of Friday afternoon, Trump hadn't spoken to Obama about the social media post, a person familiar with the matter said. Trump has long been a critic of Obama. He amplified false allegations that Obama wasn't born in the U.S. and demanded that the then president release his long-form birth certificate. Trump later conceded that Obama was born in the U.S. U.S.-Polish relations fray over Trump's Nobel quest by Thomas Grove and Carolina Jesnok. Warsaw. A spat broke out between the U.S. and one of its most important NATO partners this week, after it emerged that a leading Polish official refused to sign up to a lobbying effort to get President Trump awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Speaker of Poland's lower house, Władimir Zerzowski, brushed off a joint U.S. and Israeli initiative to secure nominations from around the world for Trump to be awarded the 2026 prize this year, calling the American leader a destabilizing force in international politics. The U.S. ambassador to Poland, Thomas Rose, hit back on X, writing that the embassy would cut ties with Zerzowski, accusing him of firing outrageous and unprovoked insults against Trump and provoking a vociferous backlash in Poland. Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who presides over a center-left coalition government, responded to the post on X, saying, "Mr. Ambassador Rose, allies should respect, not lecture each other. At least this is how we here in Poland understand partnership." Poland has long counted itself one of the U.S.'s staunchest allies since the end of the Cold War. Warsaw has raised military spending in line with Trump's vision of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and become one of the world's biggest buyers of U.S. arms. It has one of the bloc's largest armies. The recent dispute, though, puts Poland on a growing list of countries to draw the ire of the U.S. administration as Trump publicly strives for the award. He blamed Norway this year after the Nobel Committee, based in Norway, gave the Peace Prize to a Venezuelan political activist. He then linked his attempts to gain the semi-autonomous Danish territory of Greenland to his failure to clinch the prize, telling the Norwegian Prime Minister that he no longer needed to think purely of peace. The ambassador's words are adding to growing anger in Poland over Trump's contention that the U.S. didn't need NATO and that its allies didn't participate on the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq. More than 70 Poles died serving in those conflicts and hundreds were injured. The dispute isn't likely to rupture relations, but it demonstrates how Trump's personal involvement in U.S. foreign policy, coupled with his growing antagonism to other NATO countries, has affected Washington's ties with some of its closest allies in Europe. We were dominated by the USSR. That's why we fled to the West and want to be part of that value system. One might be concerned that something similar to Soviet domination is taking place within Trump's administration, said Poland's former Special Forces commander, General Roman Polko, who served in Afghanistan. U.S. has strong options to squeeze Cuba. Washington can target goods, flights, and money transfers to get concessions by Jose de Cordoba and Santiago Perez. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Cancel says his country is ready to negotiate with the U.S., but only as sovereign equals. The reality is that the Trump administration has powerful tools to extract concessions from an insolvent communist regime facing economic calamity. The U.S. has cut off flows of oil, and it can cut money transfers, travel, and goods to Cuba, isolating the island like never before since its 1959 revolution ushered in totalitarian communist rule. Washington is wary about the prospect of a humanitarian crisis, which risks fueling a U.S.-bound exodus, as occurred with the Mariel boat lift in 1980. Cuba is penniless. Its biggest vulnerability is its inability to pay for the oil and fuel it needs to keep the lights on and its economy running. The country requires about 100,000 barrels a day. It produces 40,000 barrels a day. Since last month, oil shipments from Venezuela and Mexico, which Cuba used to make up the gap, have stopped. Trump effectively recently set up an oil blockade when he called the island a security threat and warned that it would impose punitive tariffs on any country shipping oil to Cuba. Experts estimate Cuba could run out of oil within weeks. The U.S. could further squeeze Cuba by cutting off remittances, crucial to the island's economic survival. Cubans get more than $2 billion in money transfers from relatives working in the U.S. Remittances are vital because the country can't generate hard currency through exports. The island's output has crumbled after decades of economic mismanagement. U.S. trade sanctions also have hurt the economy. Cuba's biggest generator of hard currency are the more than 20,000 doctors the island sends to more than 50 countries, including Mexico and South Africa. Its exports are largely limited to cigars, rum, nickel, and cobalt. The sugar industry, the engine of the economy since colonial times, is now in tatters. Cuba imports the bulk of the sugar it needs to meet domestic demand. Cuba relies heavily on Florida. An air bridge from Miami and Tampa to Havana and other cities brings in millions of dollars in cash, as well as tons of clothing, footwear, medicines, consumer goods, power generators, and food sent by Cubans living in the U.S. to their loved ones on the island. Miami International Airport offers about 8 daily flights to Cuba, mostly to Havana. The flights are filled with an army of Cuban-American mules, hauling large bags that are closely inspected by Cuban customs officers. This week, Representative Carlos Jimenez, a Republican from Florida, sent letters to major U.S. airline executives calling on them to end all commercial flights to Cuba. Commercial flights provide the Cuban dictatorship with hard currency that directly benefits the regime, he wrote, arguing that U.S. national security interests were at stake. Experts say it is unlikely the U.S. would use outright force against Cuba. The risk of social turmoil, in addition to humanitarian crisis, could spark civil war or a new migration wave to Florida. More than 1 million people, roughly a tenth of the population, have fled Cuba since 2020, most of them to the U.S. The once mighty Cuban army has been sharply pared down and largely transformed into a tourism management company. Cuba still has some 50,000 soldiers, mostly equipped with aging Soviet equipment, and likely would pose little resistance. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Beijing is accused of secretly conducting nuclear tests by Michael Gordon and Robbie Kramer. Washington. The Trump administration alleged that China has conducted nuclear tests with low explosive power, challenging Beijing's claims that it has upheld an international agreement that prohibits all nuclear tests. The allegation, made in a speech in Geneva by a senior State Department official Friday, is part of a U.S. effort to press China to join new talks with Washington and Moscow on limiting nuclear weapons after the Thursday expiration of the 2010 New START Accord. China conducted one such yield-producing nuclear test on June 22, 2020, said Thomas DiNanno, the top State Department official for arms control and international security, told a United Nations disarmament body. China has denied that it is conducting clandestine low-yield nuclear tests. The suspicion that it might secretly be carrying out low-yield nuclear tests at its Lop Nor site in northwest China has been around for years. But this is the first time the U.S. has made such a direct accusation. China's envoy on disarmament, Shen Jian, didn't directly respond to DiNanno's charge. The Chinese embassy in Washington didn't respond to a request for comment. The expiration of New START leaves the U.S. and Russia without an arms control agreement for the first time in half a century. The Trump administration says it wants to negotiate a new accord that would include China and cover more types of weapons. Shen said Beijing isn't ready to join the new nuclear talks because its arsenal is much smaller than that of the U.S. and Russia. Arms control proponents say the Trump administration is risking a nuclear arms race by allowing New START to lapse without making suggestions for a new accord or even accepting a Russian proposal for a one-year weapons ceiling. Much of DiNanno's speech criticized the now-lapsed accord, which he noted didn't cover Russian short-range nuclear weapons, new types of Russian nuclear weapons, or Chinese forces. He called for a new architecture that addresses the threats of today. The New START agreement capped the number of U.S. and Russian long-range nuclear warheads at 1,550 and didn't cover short-range nuclear weapons. China has a stockpile of nuclear weapons that was in the low 600s through 2024, but is projected to have more than 1,000 warheads by 2030, according to a Pentagon report issued in December. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1996 allows activities to assure the safety and reliability of nuclear weapons, including experiments involving fissile material, as long as they don't result in nuclear explosive yield. The question is whether China stepped over that line, as the Trump administration alleges. The treaty isn't legally enforced because not enough nations have ratified it, though major powers, including China, Russia, and the U.S., say they are abiding by its terms. While the U.S. and China have signed the pact, neither has ratified it. Russia has signed the accord but withdrew its ratification in 2023 amid tensions with the West over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. DiNanno said the Chinese military sought to conceal testing by obfuscating the nuclear explosions because it recognized these tests violate test ban commitments. DiNanno said the U.S. government has information that Beijing has prepared to carry out tests with yields in the hundreds of tons. He didn't say whether the explosions of that magnitude actually had occurred. Japan leader seeks tighter U.S. alliance. The prime minister bet her seat in an election Sunday to cement her power. Jason Douglas and Junko Fukutomi. Tokyo. Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi wore a black leather jacket and rode a motorcycle to her admissions interview at an elite training academy for aspiring leaders 4 decades ago. The 20-something daughter of a factory worker who played drums in a heavy metal band wore a crisp suit under her biker jacket. In her interview, she declared with beaming confidence a goal of entering politics, a field still dominated in Japan by wealthy sons of famous dynasties. I got the impression that she was someone who would carve out her own destiny, recalled Masato Homa, who sat in Takaichi's interview when he was a senior at the Matsushita Institute of Government and Management. Now, after carving a path to the summit of Japanese politics, Takaichi is wagering her prime minister's seat in an election Sunday she hopes will cement her power and help fulfill her vision of building a stronger Japan that is indispensably an ally to the U.S. Takaichi says she will quit as prime minister if her ruling coalition loses its majority. The latest polls show her on course to win not just a bigger majority for her coalition, but possibly an outright majority by her Liberal Democratic Party alone. Takaichi wants to rebuild Japan's military and use aggressive fiscal spending to drag her country out of decades of economic torpor. The 64-year-old leader plans to funnel investment into domestic industries with an aim to sharpen Japan's technological edge in products with worldwide demand, such as semiconductors, chip-making equipment, precision machinery, and next-generation batteries. While other countries retreat from the U.S., recoiling from President Trump's tariffs and demands, Takaichi is doubling down on Japan's ties to America. In her view, the relationship can't weaken given Japan's substantial financial interests in the U.S. as well as the growing economic and security threats from China, according to Japanese diplomats, people familiar with her thinking and Takaichi's speeches. China in recent months has unleashed a barrage of economic measures aimed at pressuring Japan over remarks Takaichi made about the risk of Japan getting dragged into any conflict over Taiwan. Much like her political mentor, the late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Takaichi has invested in building rapport with Trump. In October, she addressed cheering U.S. troops alongside the president aboard the aircraft carrier USS George Washington, docked near Tokyo. Takaichi suggested to Trump that he use the occasion to announce a major investment in the U.S. by Japanese car giant Toyota, according to a person familiar with their discussions. She is pushing a Japanese pledge to invest a total of $550 billion in the U.S. over the remainder of Trump's presidency, part of a deal for him to lower tariffs. Initial projects under consideration including power generation for data centers, oil storage facilities, and a plant that makes synthetic diamonds for industrial use, according to a person familiar with the matter. Takaichi has already proven to be a strong, powerful, and wise leader, Trump posted in an endorsement Thursday on Truth Social, wishing her luck in the election. The White House didn't respond to a request for comment. Keeping Trump happy will be tougher than it was when Abe wooed the president with the gift of a gold-plated golf club in 2016. Trump, in his second term, has tested long-standing alliances in ways that sow doubt among leaders in Asia about America's commitment to the region's security. Takaichi's ambitions to revitalize the Japanese economy are restrained by an aging workforce and China's manufacturing dominance. Her goal of making Japan's industries essential to the American economy rubs against Trump's demands that manufacturing move to the U.S. The Prime Minister plans new tax breaks alongside stepped-up defense and industrial spending, all adding to Japan's colossal debt. Opposition parties say her fiscal plans will worsen inflation. Markets also are wary. Long-term interest rates in Japan shot higher late last month after Takaichi set out her tax and spending plans, reflecting investor worries about new borrowing. The yen had weakened sharply this year, too, until the U.S. and Japanese authorities signaled their willingness to prop up the currency. Nonetheless, the Japanese yen has fallen more than 3% against the dollar since Takaichi took office in late October. Yet, Takaichi, like her political idol, former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, is known for being unbowed. She enjoys personal popularity that regularly puts her cabinet's approval rating at between 60 and 70%. She is especially popular with younger voters who say they are drawn to her decisiveness, easygoing public persona, and the fact that she is a woman at the top of the Japanese government. I had no political base, no name recognition, no campaign funds, Takaichi said at a rally last month, recalling her first steps in politics. People told her to give up, she said. I really gritted my teeth and persevered for 30 years before finally becoming prime minister, Takaichi said. I've reached a position where I might be able to accomplish things I couldn't have before. Takaichi, through a spokesman, declined to comment. Iron Maiden. Takaichi grew up in the Japanese prefecture of Nara, a mountainous region and home to an ancient capital where sacred deer roam parks and temples. Her father worked in a car parts factory, and her mother was an administrator in the police department. By working part-time jobs, Takaichi scraped together the money to attend Kobe University, where she studied business administration and played in a heavy metal band. Even today, she asks schoolchildren if they have heard of Deep Purple, Judas Priest, and Iron Maiden, which she still counts among her favorite bands. After graduation, Takaichi applied to the Matsushita Institute. The austere institution southwest of Tokyo was set up by the founder of consumer electronics giant Panasonic to nurture future leaders who, like Takaichi, didn't have the privileged background typical of Japanese politicians. Matsushita students live in dormitories and woke at 6 a.m. to clean the school top to bottom, said Hiroto Abe, who attended the institute and overlapped with Takaichi in the early 1980s. Classes included economics and English, as well as meditation, calligraphy, and kendo, a martial art. Students sold Panasonic products door to door as part of their coursework, reflecting the founder's philosophy that running a country wasn't much different from running a business. Takaichi offered to change batteries and light bulbs of potential customers to get her foot in the door, using her wits to blast through her sales targets, said Satoshi Shima, another Matsushita graduate. Takaichi spurned the chance for an apprenticeship at a Japanese conglomerate to instead take a job in Washington, D.C. She worked 9 months, for Representative Patricia Schroeder, a Colorado Democrat who championed women's rights and toyed with a run for presidency. Burt Ramlow, who was Schroeder's administrative assistant, recalled Takaichi as a hard worker. Takaichi made cookies and origami animals for the office staff, and said Ramlow, who keeps 2 paper cranes Takaichi made and hangs them on a Christmas tree every year. Takaichi arrived in Washington in 1988 with only a few $100s and lived so frugally she slept on cardboard boxes until her landlady lent her a blanket, that her stories served for years as a warning to Matsushita students thinking of traveling abroad, said Shima, her former classmate. Defensive measures. Takaichi, who is married to a former politician, stays up late reading policy documents, foregoing the drinks and dinners that typically bond Japanese lawmakers. She is a Japanese nationalist and a conservative who opposes same-sex marriage and has been critical of statements from her past prime ministers expressing remorse for Japan's brutal conduct in the years leading to its defeat in World War II. In the past, she has defended Japan's wartime actions as a matter of survival and questioned whether such apologies have helped bring reconciliation with Japan's neighbors. Such views aren't unusual in Japanese politics, but they repel some of the electorate. When Takaichi won the leadership of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party in October, her third attempt in seizing the top spot, the Komito Party, the LDP's partner in government for a quarter of a century, quit the coalition, in part because of Takaichi's conservative views. She quickly recovered from the loss by securing a new coalition partner, the Japanese Innovation Party, a free market group more in sync with her conservative politics. In calling Sunday's snap election, Takaichi's gambling that her personal popularity will give the LDP-led coalition a bigger majority in the lower house of the Japanese parliament and a freer hand to pursue her agenda. Takaichi is the kind of leader more in line with Washington. She said she would raise Japanese spending on defense to 2% of gross domestic product by the end of the current fiscal year. Money for missiles, ships, and a drone-based defense system to protect Japan's far-flung islands. Trump has called on allies to spend as much as 5% of the GDP on defense, and analysts expect Japan is likely to come under pressure to increase spending. Takaichi has signaled she is open to further increases. She wants to do what Trump wants Japan to do, spend more money on defense, said David Bowling, principal at the Asia Group, a strategic advisory firm. Japan has to be able to show it's taking its own defense seriously in order for the U.S. to have confidence in Japan. New World. Japan and other Asian countries have been disoriented by Trump's second-term actions, including steep tariffs on allies, the president's pursuit of Greenland, and the military capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Even more confusing has been Trump's whipsaw dealings with China. The president initially raised tariffs aggressively, but has since reached a truce with Chinese leader Xi Jinping ahead of an expected summit in April. On one hand, Trump has loosened restrictions on sales of certain high-tech chips to China, yet he also authorized new arms sales to Taiwan, which Beijing views as a renegade province to be brought to heel by force if necessary. The U.S. seeks a balance of power with China in Asia, with American forces and beefed-up allies deterring Beijing through strength, not confrontation, according to the 2026 National Defense Strategy, a policy that broadly aligns with Takaichi's priorities. Even so, there remains some anxiety in Tokyo and other Asian capitals that Trump might consider ceding U.S. influence in Asia to Xi and sideline its interests of countries such as Japan in return for a grand bargain on trade. Turning now to opinion, a lament for the Washington Post, declarations by Peggy Noonan. The diminishment of the Washington Post hits hard because it feels like another demoralizing thing in our national life. Our public life as a nation, how we are together, how we talk to each other, the sound of us, isn't what it was. It's gone down, and we all feel this, all the grown-ups. The Post was a pillar. The sweeping layoffs and narrowing of coverage announced this week following years of buyouts and shrinking sections. None of this feels like the restructuring of a paper or rearranging of priorities, but like the doing in of a paper, a great one, a thing of journalistic grandeur from some point in the 1960s through the point in the 2020s. I feel it damaged itself when, under the pressure of the pandemic, George Floyd, and huge technological and journalistic changes, it wobbled. And not in the opinion section, but on the news side. But I kept my subscription because this is a way of trusting, of giving a great paper time to study itself. And there would always be an important David Ignatius column or a great scoop on some governmental scandal that made it worth the cost. But the Post diminishment, which looks like its demise, isn't just a media story. Reaction shouldn't break down along the ideological lines in which the left feels journalism is its precinct and is sad, and the right feels journalism is its hulking enemy and isn't sad. Treat it that way and we'll fail to see the story for its true significance. The capital of the most powerful nation on the earth appears to be without a vital, fully functioning newspaper to cover it. That isn't the occasion of jokes, it's a disaster. I fear sometimes that few people really care about journalism, but we are dead without it. Someday something bad will happen, something terrible on a national scale, and the thing we'll need most, literally to survive, is information. Reliable information, a way to get to it, and then to get it to the public. That is what journalism is, getting the information. You have to think of it as part of our country's survival system. Maybe the government will or won't tell you the truth about what's going on. Maybe the Pentagon will or won't. But if you know you've got this fabulous island of broken toys, professional journalism, working for a reputable news organization, you've got a real chance of learning what's true. It takes years to make good reporters, people who are trained, who love getting the story so much, who love the news so much that they will wade into the fire, run to the sound of the guns. They are grown only in newsrooms, not at home with laptops. They are taught by older craftsmen and professionals through stories and lore. The Post's greatness and expertise can't easily be replaced, and perhaps it can't be replaced at all, or at least not for decades of committed building. It is possible what we're witnessing is an owner, Jeff Bezos, deciding that its newspaper is a 20th century structure in a 21st century world, that it couldn't be changed or gradually moderated, so he and his executives are tearing it down to the studs. Maybe he'll sell it, maybe he'll keep it and rebuild it, but that will take a long, long time. You can't immediately get or win back the stature of a thing, the presence, the professionalism. You can't snap your fingers, wash away the whole world, erect a new one, and have it work well and quickly. And this will have an impact on our democracy. Why is the end of a great newspaper not good for democracy? Let's journey back to Thomas Jefferson in Paris in 1787 as American minister to France. Back home, they were debating the U.S. Constitution. In a letter dated January 16th to his friend Edward Carrington, a member of the Continental Congress, his thoughts. Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. He wasn't being flip. He understood journalism was a defense against tyranny. Government, by its nature, always wants to accumulate power and use it. A watchful press slows this process, sometimes stops it by exposing its abuses. If citizens are informed, they can self-govern from a rough baseline of realism. The good sense of the people, Jefferson wrote, is always the best army. True, they can be led astray, but their mistakes will be limited and can be corrected through information that can penetrate the whole mass of the people. When the public is uninformed, those running government shall all become wolves. He absolutely knew those who report could produce work that was partisan, inaccurate, and sensationalistic. He himself became quite the mischievous manipulator of the press. But again, the process could self-correct, especially if a nation had a big, burgeoning information culture, with everyone keeping an eye on everyone else. In any case, he was certain a free press was safer for the Republic than what would otherwise become government censorship and propaganda. This is so self-evidently true, and so pertinent to this moment, that it becomes obvious that the capital of the most powerful nation in the world, operating without a big main newspaper to monitor, is a danger and a threat. I do not understand the figure of Mr. Bezos. Nice man, met him, always treated as a kind of business visionary, and fair enough. But what is he about right now? I can't believe the fourth wealthiest person in the world, and in history, would dash his own historic reputation to curry favor with the Trump administration. For what? More contracts? He's got enough contracts. It's so small time, so penny ante. What matters is honor. That's the thing that lasts. What history says of you, how you helped your country. As for those who execute diminishments, we are in the midst of a continuing technological revolution. The internet upended the business model. It's hard out there. But I'll tell you, I have been meeting the same media executives for 20 years, and there's something wrong. Their eyes light up as they offer lengthy, detailed explanations of the challenges in modern journalism, why it's dying, why nothing works. When talk turns to what to do, how to negotiate the landscape, their eyes turn dead. It isn't just that they don't know how, it's that they've fallen in love with the doom loop. Their only creativity is in describing everything that is killing their company, and they have vivid words for it. strangling, pummeling. They have no words for coming alive and enduring. Might this be part of the problem? Finally, losing the one major newspaper left in the great nation's capital, and during the Trump administration no less, during a time of the easy abuse of standards and traditions, of inching up to and then inching over the law, in a pattern that promises not to get better but worse, is more than a Jeffersonian nightmare. It is a kind of sin, the kind of history doesn't easily forgive. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Review and outlook. Mass deportation and Florida jobs. Florida's economy has been one of the greatest success stories in recent decades with robust jobs growth. But in the last year, employment has suddenly slowed. Could the cause be a misguided immigration enforcement policy? The Sunshine State's job growth was consistently among the highest in the U.S. during the pandemic and the prior decade thanks to low taxes and a pro-business environment. COVID lockdowns in progressive states supercharged Florida's population and workforce growth. But in May 2023, Florida Republicans passed legislation aimed at countering Joe Biden's porous border policies. The law's centerpiece requires private employers with 25 or more employees to use the federal government's E-Verify system to confirm the work authorization of new hires. Violations could result in $1,000 daily fines and suspension of a business's license. Governor Ron DeSantis claimed to be fighting back against reckless federal government policies. There's no doubt the migrant surge burdened some communities, but the E-Verify mandate makes it harder for migrants to work to support themselves, and it adds a burden on employers. E-Verify can also be unreliable because it relies on federal records that aren't always up to date. That means it can disqualify some immigrants with valid work permits. U.S. Labor Department data suggests that Florida's E-Verify law has harmed job growth. In the year before the law took effect, Florida led the country in job creation. But employment growth fell by half in 2024 and has been flat since last February. The state ranked 26th in the country in job growth over the past 12 months, during which it lost 7,500 jobs in construction and 2,500 in leisure and hospitality, both of which rely heavily on migrant labor. Texas added 15,700 and 26,500 jobs in those industries respectively during the same period. What's the matter with Florida? Employers in the state say they are struggling to find workers they can employ legally. Non-citizens made up 1/3 of Florida's construction workforce and nearly half of farmhands. A large share are undocumented. 2/3 of contractors in the state report labor shortages. For every 5 construction workers who retire, only 1 new worker is entering the field. Farmers say that many foreign workers left the state after the law passed. One farmer told Spectrum News in early 2024 that he needed more workers to pick strawberries, but that he purposefully limited the size of his workforce to less than 25 workers to avoid having to use E-Verify. Talk about a perverse incentive for businesses not to expand. But instead of repealing the E-Verify mandate, Florida Republicans now want to extend it to all employers. The bill passed the state house last month. This will expose a lot of lawbreakers that are harming Floridians, harming law-abiding people who want to get into the workforce, House sponsor Bernie Jacks said. There's little evidence that undocumented migrants are taking jobs from Americans. The reality is that employers can't find enough Americans willing to work in the fields or hang drywall, even at attractive wages. Farmhands in Florida who work year-round earn roughly $47,000, which is more than what some young college graduates earn. Republicans who want every illegal worker deported cite the rule of law, but they also decline to allow legal pathways to work in the U.S. There are human and economic costs to all this, and Florida's campaign threatens to mar Mr. DeSantis' impressive economic record. The lesson for President Trump is that businesses can't grow if government takes away their workers. And we'll end with sports. Seahawks and Patriots defied modern football. Super Bowl 60 is a matchup between 2 defensive schemers. San Francisco by Andrew Beaton. When the Seattle Seahawks moved on from longtime coach Pete Carroll 2 years ago, it could have been their chance to follow the modern wisdom of building a franchise around a young, offensive-minded schemer. Instead, they landed on someone half of Carroll's age whose background was on the other side of the ball. For the first coaching hire in more than a decade, the Seahawks were convinced that 36-year-old defensive whiz Mike Macdonald would return them to the top of the sport. This is the future right here, General Manager John Schneider said at McDonald's introductory press conference. The past 6 Super Bowls have all had one thing in common. Every head coach has built his career as a schemer on offense. But both the Seahawks and Patriots have reached the final game of the season precisely because they bucked the trend with Macdonald and New England's Mike Vrabel. Come Sunday, it's now certain that the Lombardi Trophy will go to a defensive-minded head coach for the first time since Bill Belichick. It brings a little bit of old-school feel to it, said Hall of Fame safety Charles Woodson. At the same time, these teams are in the Super Bowl because they're not completely stuck in the Stone Age. Their coaches have blended some ancient principles with contemporary schemes and philosophies. In some ways, the current versions of the Seahawks and Patriots are reminiscent of both of their heydays. Belichick, a former defensive coordinator, was the architect of New England's dynasty. Carroll, another defensive mind, was on the headset for Seattle's lone Super Bowl victory. Based on those hires, it isn't difficult to see why the Seahawks and the Patriots might have wanted to revive those defense wins championships cultures, adapted for the 2020s. Macdonald cut his teeth coaching elite defenses for John Harbaugh with the Ravens and his brother Jim Harbaugh at the University of Michigan. And when the Seahawks replaced Carroll with Macdonald, they went from having the oldest coach in the league to having the youngest. The gamble paid off. This year, Seahawks boasted the NFL's #1 defense for the first time since Carroll's Legion of Boom. In New England, Vrabel won 3 Super Bowls playing for Belichick before embarking on his coaching career. But while some of his coaching style resembles Belichick, he's also a new school thinker in plenty of respects. For instance, throughout his time on the sideline, he has been among the more aggressive coaches going for it on 4th downs. These days, though, coaches in the Belichick, Carroll, and Macdonald or Vrabel mold are increasingly the exception. Over the past 30 years, only 3 coaches with defensive backgrounds not named Belichick or Carroll have won the Super Bowl. This year, when there were 10 head coaching openings, 7 went to coaches who climbed the ranks on the offense. That includes Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who's slated to take over the Las Vegas Raiders. Kubiak also shows how these teams walk the tightrope between old school football and the cutting edge of new age thinking. Kubiak joined the Seahawks to revive their run game and had an immediate impact. After being one of the most pass-heavy teams last year, running the ball on just 37.2% of the plays, Seattle upped that ratio to 50%, the 3rd highest in the league. The only teams that rush more, Baltimore and Buffalo, have jet-setting quarterbacks in Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Yet Kubiak was also a prize candidate on the coaching market because his playbook is so forward-thinking. He's a disciple of 49ers coach Kyle Shanahan, who is considered one of the top offensive schemers around. Now the Seahawks know that they only have him for one more game. It's a little bittersweet because he's such a great person and a great coach, Macdonald said. The challenge across the field is a New England defense that underwent its own transformation. The Patriots went from 22nd in points allowed last season to 4th. And even though Macdonald and Vrabel might be anomalies in the current NFL landscape, it wouldn't be a surprise to see more coaches like them in this copycat league. This will be an identity war, Vrabel said, on the biggest stage. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Saturday, February 7th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,